Kamarjoba, and welcome everyone who joined the webinar. Here, my name is Natia Chankwatadze, and I'm a new director of the program on Georgian Studies at the Davis Center, Harvard University. The program has started in January 2022, and its founding director is Professor Stephen Jones, who is here and who will moderate this webinar. The program has started with the research grants supported by the Ministry of Science and Education of Georgia. And this is the first webinar that we organized in this semester. This webinar is about the election results in Georgia and what do they mean in countries for countries' future. But I'm sure there are many questions that are posted in this webinar, and also many questions that are still unanswered about the elections. And we also have election results not only in Georgia but in Moldova and also here in the United States. I want to tell for those people who don't follow the program much, please visit us at the Davis Center website and follow the events, especially if you happen to be in Cambridge, in Boston physically. Program has two different exhibits. One is about Georgian modern art and about Tbilisi photo exhibit, and please visit and see it. This is all probably from my side, and I'm thankful for all the panelists and also Stephen, who moderates it, and everyone who joined or will join in the audience. That's it, Stephen.
Thank you, Natia. My name is Stephen Jones. I'm a senior researcher now in the program Georgian Studies at the Davis Center. And we are discussing the 10th parliamentary election that's taken place in Georgia since 1990. And arguably, this is one of the most decisive elections. The questions before the electorate were quite clear in terms of, do they want to move closer to Europe, or will they live under the shadow of Russia? Do they want a system that would be more democratic, or one that would follow the program of Georgian Dream, which has introduced a couple of laws this year which suggest that the law on, for example, on the foreign agents law, and also the law on the protection of the family and minors, suggest that Georgian Dream is moving to a more restricted version of democracy. So those were, in some sense, the choices that faced the Georgian electorate. And so it's pretty decisive. And of course, the choice has been made. So it's been a busy week for our panelists, I'm sure. You know, the 10 days since the election, there have been a number of panels on elections in Georgia. And now, of course, on top of that, as Natia mentioned, we have the US election and the impact that will have on the future of Georgia. And that's going to also be equally decisive, not only for the US, for the world, and of course for the region of the South Caucasus and Georgia, perhaps in particular. So this is a very important discussion, and I want to thank everybody for attending, and I want to thank in particular our panelists. We have about 1 hour and 30 minutes, and I'm going to give the panelists 10 minutes each. We have, as I said, 4 excellent panelists, and I'm going to introduce them when they make their contribution. I'm not going to introduce them all together right now. So the first of our speakers is Beka Kobachidze. He received his PhD from Ivana Javrishvili State University in 2015. He's co-chair of the Master's Program in Modern History of Georgia, and he's professor at Ilia State University of Modern Georgian History. He's also been a fellow twice at the Davis Center, the second time as a Fulbright fellow. His interests are in the foreign policy of the Democratic Republic of Georgia between 1918 and 1921, which he's published many articles. And of course, he's best known today for his analyses of current Georgian politics. So I'm going to hand it over to Beka. I asked him to look in particular at the electoral process. How did what were the mechanics in the sense of the election, talk about the outcome of the election and the consequences of the election for Georgia, of the Georgian Dream victory. So, Becca, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm giving you 10 minutes.
Stephen, thanks for the introduction. Since I have very limited time, so I'll speak about the elections right away. As Stephen rightly noted, the opposition, the election was in reality about the choice of West or Russia. And opposition attempted to put forward this referendum questions that you want to go and join the European Union or you want to stay under the shadow of Russia. However, government with its own propaganda machine tried to bring forward another question. You want a war or peace? And in this case, government posed itself as the peace party, while the opposition was the war party. And this was quite powerful thing to do because Georgia in the last 3 decades experienced 4 wars, and these 4 wars left Georgian economy humiliated. Thousands of people died, and country was humiliated basically. And at the same time, the governmental communication channels were way more powerful than the ones of the opposition. So, for example, the pro-governmental main TV channel, Tele Imedi, last year had minus 75 million lari budget deficit, which is roughly 23, 24 or 30, yes, 30 million, around 30 million US dollars, while the opposition TV channels for months, some of them for months cannot give wages to its employees. At the same time, the government had enormous resources. Even by official figures, Georgian Dream was several times richer than all other opposition parties combined. But these are only official figures because the Georgian Dream was using the state budget as a leverage to influence on voters. And people were intimidated, they were bribed, and various methods were used. So, for example, in many cases, opposition coup was unable to find loyal coordinators and members of the election commissions in villages, in districts, cities, because all these commission members were targeted by the Georgian Dream government. In some cases, it was through intimidation and threats. In some other cases, they were giving land, so state-owned lands were issued to the people to invite their loyalty. In some other cases, so for example, the certificates were falsified, so the false certificates were given to the people as if their properties were damaged by landslides, by some natural disasters, and with the certificates they can claim compensation from the state budget. And we are speaking here now about hundreds of millions of lari. In some cases, when people were just very ideological, they were pro-Western, pro-Europe, they were just threatened by the security services. And there were dozens of publicly released information about people being confiscated their IDs. So they would go to those state employees door to door and request transfer of their ID cards. And these ID cards the government would use during the election day, and someone else would vote for them. I mean, this was just confiscation, and if these people spoke out, had these people spoken out, they would be dismissed from their jobs. Those are like city halls, local municipalities, schools, kindergartens, etc. I mean, this part was done prior to the elections, and during the election days, the carousels were played out in mass. So the unfamiliar audience might not know what is the carousel. So the carousel is something. I mean, it works the following way. One person with different ID numbers, 10, 15, 22 ID numbers. So the ID number is similar to US Social Security number. Goes from polling station to polling station and votes for several people. And in this way, number of voters or turnout was inhaled, artificially swollen. And turnout this year was almost 2.1 million people. The record turnout in Georgian elections was in 2012, when less than 2.2 million people voted. And if you believe these figures, 12 years after the 2012, only 100,000 people fewer turned out than 12 years ago, while in the last 12 years, even by official statistics, almost 400,000 people left the country. I mean, this was even by figures, statistically, this was impossible to have such a turnout, and there are very reasonable doubts that ID numbers or social security numbers of those people who are in immigration was used in the voting process. We should also bear in mind that in Georgia, up to 700,000 people receive social supplements from the state. Social supplements, so up to 700,000 people. This is almost 1/3 of the people who have voted, and also the state is a major employer. So like administrations, central governmental administrations, municipalities in the villages elsewhere, and all these people, out of threat to be sacked, were flocked even before the elections. So they were flocked to attend the Georgian Dream rallies, and during the elections, they were transported and flocked en masse to the polling stations. On the other hand, when we had elections going abroad, so when the diaspora was voting, and the diaspora is wildly anti-government, our government put in place all possible hurdles to prevent people from voting. And in immigration, government received pro-governmental, ruling party received only 17% of the votes. To be very honest, with you, I know some of the OSCE observers who were on the place to monitor the elections, and they were shocked, pretty much shocked to see what was going there. And to wrap it up, these elections were neither fair nor free, and the results. The elections were. The bottom line is that elections were stolen. And one more thing also to add is that it was not secret voting, because it was first ever electronic election, so you had to put your ballot inside the machine, and it was transparent. So on the other side of the paper, you would see ink indicating to which party the voters voted for. And this planted pretty much fears among the most vulnerable groups, mostly amongst the public employees. But then the bottom line is that there were so many factors affecting the voting process that it's safe to say that the results doesn't by far reflect the popular will in Georgia. So here I will stop, Stephen, and then maybe during the Q&A I can cover other topics.
Thank you, Becca. That's a very grim picture that you're describing here. What you're suggesting, and I think a lot of people agree with you, certainly the Georgian Young Lawyers Association and the organization called My Vote, which unites a number of NGOs and has been monitoring the election, that there was systematic manipulation and corruption concerning the elections. I want Marina to follow up with this question and to address the relationship between the election result and popular opinion, and to look at the influences of this election in terms perhaps of Russia, what its role has been, or the Georgian Orthodox Church. So I'm going to turn it over to Marina, and let me say a few words about Marina before she says a few words. Marina is a professor of psychology at Tbilisi State University. She received her PhD from the Institute of Psychology at the Georgian Academy of Sciences. She's the author of 3 books. She was the founder of the Center for Social Sciences think tank, Director General of the National Science Foundation of Georgia between 2014 and 2017. Her research interests are authoritarianism, personality, the authoritarian personality and their social dimensions. I could say much more about Marina, but I'm going to hand it over to her, and I want to thank you for being here, Marina, and you've got about 10 minutes too. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for having me here. I'll start with that. I'll somehow follow up what already Becca said, and mainly it's about the elections, and not on the day of the elections, but before, what was happening. In all polls, so Georgian Dream was receiving much less support, and there were around 55% public during the public polls that they have not decided. It was going around the 1 year after in May when we received this law. So these numbers even increased in terms that opposing the Georgian Dream. And on the day of the elections and afterwards, on the before and on the day of the elections, after the exit polls were published, nearly in 12 hours, the first official results came out, and the 2 major polling companies, Edison Research and Harris X, so they were used to publish that such type of the discrepancy between the exit polls and the Central Election Committee official numbers, it's statistically impossible. And the discrepancy is around 13–14%. So what is the reason? What Becca said about the ID cards, so it is very clear that both companies agree on that there is some vote manipulations around 170,000 to 200,000. And how it was done, so it's different opinions, but anyhow, this is first statistically impossible, and second, there is a discrepancy in the numbers of the voting, those who were voting with this poll. Before that, how the Georgian Dream persuaded the electorate, let's say so, it's quite interesting, because a few days before election, I called one of my colleagues and said, look, can we just look of those who are supporting? So it wasn't the day election, who is supporting the Georgian Dream, because we have to know the, let's say, social the social cluster who is supporting. And when we discussed the different variables, what we can just take out from Central Election Commission or Statistical Department, it turned out that, again, in Georgia, we do not have the same data sets, and it is very difficult to come out or predict who will vote and how they will vote. Still, Harris X published afterwards that who vote for the Georgian Dream, age and gender differences, and rural-urban placement. So mostly urban, mostly rural, and places, geographical places with national minorities had the high voted highly for Georgian Dream. And women voted for all other political parties, let's say so, more. And there is a differences in the percentage of in age groups. But however, the majority women voted for the all opposition parties, and men voted for Georgian Dream. However, in the age group 18 to 35, there was the less percentage. It was around 40% who voted for Georgian Dream. At least at this day, we know only this and nothing else. So I hope that afterwards it will be possible to go in depth and find some more data. What was used as a propaganda, I'm not, I especially use this term and not the persuasion, because the first, let's say, research was done in the United States by Carl Hovland, who was just looking on propaganda issues, and it started from 1950s. And it was done by 4, let's say, factors that is considered that the people are mostly going because of these emotional factors to the election. And these were first fear, second anxiety, then anger, and what should be mentioned is just the hate for other. And if we look on the, let's say, 1 year or 10 months, how this Georgian Dream propaganda was going, it was very much targeted to these factors. In their banners, the first was just, if not we, there will be a war. Beck already mentioned that. The second was that we are losing our identity. It was just focusing on the anxiety that we Georgians have our spatial identity and others are fighting against us. And the fourth one, it was that just cultivating the same message by the political officials, by TV, and in social media. They are also controlling quite a wide network of the social media. And those who are not supporting Georgian Dream, all these people were already announced as traitors of the country, Vrag Naroda. So this was continue that was coming almost starting from the point this People's Halkistala People's Party, let's say so, from that day of the establishment. Even a lot of people know that they are part of Georgian Dream, and now they are officially in the list of the Georgian Dream. So this was coming as a leitmotif during all the periods, that either you are with us or not with us. And the leitmotif was also we want peace. Otherwise, you will be involved in war. And it started extremely intensively after the Ukrainian war, that was very well used as a propaganda tool. The problem with all that is that is it coming? Can we consider that it is somehow related to the Russian propaganda? Yes, because there are quite a number of papers about the soft power intervention, how it could be used, etc. And there is one of the very strong allies is the Georgian Orthodox Church. Because during all this period, particularly on the LGBTQ rights, about the defending the family values, etc., so the, let's say, majority, 90% or even more of the bishops and priests were targeting all the I would call it the pseudo identity as a pure Orthodox, that we have to defend ourselves and our values. So that they are providing the false figures, it's another question. And that was very interesting moment. So Georgian Dream started to use this, let's say, church as a political tool, and they, I guess without negotiations, they declared that they are going to make Georgian Orthodox Church the state church. And it was quite interesting that Georgian Orthodox Church refused. They say no, they do not want. And if someone, so yeah, I have my personal opinion, because they did not want to be under the full control, because they are serious political actor, and they want to maintain the independence. Georgian Orthodox Church, 3 days before the elections, Patriarchate issued official statement. They was not saying that they are supporting Georgian Dream, but in this official statement was that we are supporting peace and we are supporting family values. So it was also a clear message on that to whom you are going to vote, meaning the parish who is actively going to the church. I mean those people who actually every week or several times, in 2 times at least in a month, are attending the church. So just to sum up what I have said, so we know, actually I'm more confident with the results what we have in exit polls, and it means that Georgian Dream won not more than 44 or 46%. This is the maximum. All others was taken by oppositional parties. But what we have is, first, statistically impossible. And the second is that just the clear message that those who are controlling the power, they are messing up in terms that they are maintaining this power in all kind of the matters, and they do not think about the transfer of the power in political and democratic way. Thank you.
Marina, thank you very much also for sticking to the time limit. Becca described the mechanics, if you like, of the election on the day of, and how successfully the vote was manipulated. Marina, I think you've given us a very good context. Obviously, the electoral process is not simply on the day of. It's a more systemic process that begins at least a year before the election, as you've indicated, in terms of the propaganda that Georgian Dream has issued. So we have some information now about the day the elections took place. We have some background now in terms of the context and the systemic nature of this manipulation of the election. And now, interestingly, of course, one of the groups of Georgian electors that was the least supportive of Popular Dream were the electors who lived outside Georgia, the Georgian diaspora. And I'm very grateful that we have a representative here, Salome Tsereteli-Stevens, who's with us, who lives in the United States and voted in these elections in Washington, D.C. There were some questions about the ease of the voting process for the Georgian diaspora, whether there were deliberate obstacles put in the place of electors abroad, because Georgian Dream knew that these would not be supportive for the party. Let me introduce Salome. She's president of the Georgian Association in the USA since March of 2024. She holds a law degree from Tbilisi State University. And currently she's a director of learning evidence and impact at the American Bar Association, and serves also as an adjunct professor at American University, where she teaches a graduate level course on project planning, monitoring, and evaluation at the School of International Service. So Salome is very active in the Georgian diaspora. As I said, she's the president of the Georgian Association in the USA, the largest diaspora organization in the USA currently. And I want to hand it over to Salome to talk about her own experience as a Georgian voter in the diaspora in the United States. Salome.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and thanks for the introduction. Again, I have to say I'm here in the capacity of the president of the Georgian Association and not of my employer. But it's a pleasure to be on this panel with everyone. And I know we already heard about the process of the elections in Georgia and what happened before and what happened on the day off. So let me give a perspective from the voters in the United States. There were several issues that the diaspora members, particularly abroad as well in other countries, as well as in the United States, experienced. And it didn't start on the election day. So I will kind of divide my presentation into parts relating to what happened before the election day, what happened on the election day or immediately leading up to election day, as well as immediately afterwards, and what are the current and future concerns of diaspora voters. So in terms of the information before the election day, so leading up to election, of course, many of you know that there were inconsistent and contradictory information about the expectations, whether there would be additional polling places open in different cities or countries where 50 or more Georgian voters were present. That information contradiction kind of went on for quite a long time, which made it very difficult for people to make plans about whether they were supposed to travel somewhere or they were supposed to wait and see if a polling station would be open in their city. And of course, for voters in the United States, this is a big deal because some of the distances, as you know, in the end, we ended up having just 3 polling stations, one in San Francisco, one in New York City, and one in Washington, D.C., Given the distances and the scale of the country in which we live in, this was quite difficult to make plans, to travel from Texas or Wyoming to San Francisco or from Tennessee to New York. These are related to costs. It requires quite a bit of planning, and especially was difficult for Georgian students who are here, who already are, college students. It's difficult to get by as is, so they were kind of dependent on the information to be able to make plans and travel and incur these costs. So that went on for quite a bit. of time. And even though voters who were, let's say, living near New York City or Washington, D.C. or San Francisco, trying to get information, accurate information, was difficult. We found that Georgians came to us asking, what exactly is the process? One website says one thing, the foreign ministry website says another thing, or different consular websites say different things. So as an association, we set a goal for ourselves to kind of compile reliable and correct, accurate information on our website. Of course, our reach is not unlimited, and we cannot take the place of government functions. So we felt like there was insufficient effort from the government side to try and organize this information to reach voters with accurate, credible, reliable information in advance. Of course, even months before the election, voters were not clear as to how and whether they could actually participate in the elections. What was the process for registration? Many of you may know internally displaced persons from Abkhazia or Samachablo who have status of an internally displaced person. They have particular documentation, and it was very unclear for those who are abroad with this type of status whether or not they were in the lists. They found themselves not on the voter list, and it took jumping through multiple hoops for them to get that right, be eligible to vote. And that only happened about a week before the elections with a special decree of the Central Election Commission. So again, in terms of planning and being able to make travel plans and being able to have confidence that they could go and vote, that was an incredible challenge and an obstacle. There were also issues with registration, just consular registration. There were technological obstacles. The website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was often or sometimes malfunctioning. There were issues of accessing the Central Election Commission website for people to be able to check their presence in the lists if they were accessing information or the website from abroad. We did reach out to those government institutions, and some of the issues were fixed. But of course, in the meantime, probably several voters experienced significant issues and probably did not follow through. We know that some civil society organizations, some platforms or initiative groups got together and actually started an alternative parallel platform for voters to be registering, because the official government website would not accept a certain, only would accept a certain type of photo. So this photo issue, the file issue, really became an obstacle. And so people were not able to just go in and put in their information and register. In fact, there was no error message or explanation when let's say a voter was trying to register through the main website. And so it was quite an obstacle. This was all kind of leading up in terms of the registration. There were also errors. Sometimes, we had these conversations with the government institutions, and often it was just kind of ascribed to an error. But if, let's say, Georgians abroad were traveling, sometimes they would have errors which would cause them to drop out of the voters list if they had crossed the border. Sometimes they would get a notice that they had been in the country for more than 6 months when they in fact had not been, and so that would cause them to drop off of the registration list, and they would have to go back and re-register. So there were also causing significant issues for people trying to prove that they were in fact in the US. For voters who had been in the United States for a long time and they didn't have a electronic record of crossing the border into the US, the consulates were requiring for them to appear in person and verify that they were in fact in the United States, of course, and would not accept electronic or digital appearance in 21st century, again, requiring essentially that a person travel to the consulate once before the election day to verify that they were there, then register, and then come back for the election day. This is quite an ask for Georgian immigrants who are often very far away from the consulates. And as you may know, often working in difficult conditions, not being able to take extra days off and just, travel long distances to prove that they are actually here. So those were just the registration-related issues. Now, a separate issue was rampant disinformation, which really ramped up in advance or in the run-up to the elections and targeted specifically undocumented migrants. Number of Georgian undocumented migrants in the last 3-4 years has really gone up significantly in the last few years. And they were particularly targeted with disinformation messages that said things like, you will be deported if you register for voting, or you will be deported if you go to the consulate or the embassy to cast your vote. We also heard from folks that had been harassed specifically, individually, whether directly themselves, not to go, not to vote, or their family members in Georgia, where it was known that their family member had been abroad, were harassed that this, the individual should not have gone to the polls, or their family members should not go and vote. Unfortunately, we didn't find any government efforts to counter this type of disinformation. Of course, the diaspora members mobilized themselves to share accurate information, but that was not sufficient. In fact, we know that only 51% of registered voters, which was about 13,700 voters in the United States, only almost 6,900 or so people actually cast their vote. Part of this was because of what happened before the elections, but part of it also was because of what happened on election day. Perhaps because of the registration issues, there were cases of voters showing up to the polling station and not being able to cast their vote because they were not on the list, and it was too late at that point to do anything. In New York, you may have seen videos of lines that were so long they went around several blocks, and the police had to come and organize them. But there was it took so long because about per 1,000 voters there was only one registrar, and so it took very long time to cast votes, and people were in line for 4, 5, 7 hours. Of course, if they had traveled from work and taken some time off to come and vote, they had to leave, so they were actually not able to cast their votes. So those are just some examples of what happened on the day off. Lastly, what happened afterwards? Where are we now, and what are the concerns of the Georgian diaspora? Of course, the demand is that there must be additional polling stations for the future elections where we are able to vote. We really need to have additional polling stations. We had polled Georgian diaspora before the elections, and we know for sure that probably it's more, but we know for sure that there are Georgians in at least 25 states across the United States, enough Georgians that they, and active that would want to participate in elections. So that would be number one concern. But also there are concerns about voter fraud in Georgia, as you know, and what diaspora members are worried about is that if they were not able to vote here, their ID cards, as Becca described before, may have been used in Georgia by malign actors. And currently the demand is for transparency, to open the voter lists of those people who participated in an election in Georgia, and for us, for Georgians who are here, to be able to verify for themselves that their ID number or their identity was not used by someone else to cast vote on their behalf. This is a significant issue that casts doubt on our side in terms of the government's desire for transparency. In the US, we are used to this information about who voted in the elections being public information, and we are looking forward to that investigation, that type of investigation that would give a little bit more trust and assurance to people here that, in fact, their identification and their identity was not used in any kind of voter fraud. So those are just key issues. Again, Stephen, thank you so much for giving this opportunity, and I'll stop here and happy to answer questions.
Salome, thank you very much. Very thorough description and analysis of how the vote went here in the US. I'm going to hand it over now to Miriam Lanskoy. Oh, and by the way, before I do that, we have 2 questions right now in the Q&A box, so I would encourage people to place their questions. I'm sure there are many questions that people have about the elections and the outcome. So please put your questions in the Q&A box. So our last speaker is Miriam Lanskoy, and Miriam is very well known in Washington, D.C. and in the field of Eurasian studies. She is Senior Director for Russia and Eurasia at the National Endowment for Democracy. She has 14 years of experience in political analysis and democracy promotion in post-Soviet Eurasia, and has appeared on numerous panels and conferences to discuss the political developments there. She's also published a book, The Chechen Struggle, Independence Won and Lost. Actually, you co-authored that book, Miriam. So I want to thank Miriam for being with us. And the reason Miriam is here in part is because she was an election observer in Georgia. We've had some interesting comments by Western organizations that have been monitoring this election. President Biden recently came out reporting on those statements by election monitors from Western countries, suggesting that the election perhaps was not free and fair, although we still hadn't had any definite statements suggesting that these elections were illegitimate. We're just waiting to see what those monitoring organizations will finally say in terms of their evaluation. But Miriam, thank you so much. You are a bit stripy, but that shouldn't bother you.
I know. I'm trying to figure out if I can
don't worry about
position myself better somehow.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Is that okay?
Well, it looks like you're in jail, but that's fine. We'll.
I'm not in jail yet. All right,
looking
is that
forward
better?
to. Don't worry about where you sit.
Okay.
We can hear you. We can see you. So
Okay.
I'm going to hand it over to you. And again, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's really wonderful to be here with you. I'm very grateful to you, Professor Jones, and to Natia and to Davis Center. It's great to be here. And wow, so we've already heard quite a lot about different irregularities and problems with the Georgian elections, and I'm about to add more. I did get to be an election observer with the NDI monitoring mission, so I'll give you my perspective of election day. I was in Marnauli, Balsini, and then the last polling place that I saw was in Tbilisi. Our driver and interpreter needed to vote themselves in Tbilisi. So we came back and did the count actually in Tbilisi. So I can give you a range of those places and what I saw there. And a preview of that is that there were more violations, even beyond all the violations already mentioned by the panelists. But I'd also like to get into a little bit of the roles of observers, both international and domestic, and then maybe a little bit, let me give you the view from Marnauli and then the view from DC, because I think we've got to also put this in the context of the overall relationship between Georgia and the US, which is even prior to the elections here in the US, are in a very, very complicated place. So let me try to hit both of those things as I go through. So I should say I can only speak to what I saw. I was one of, I think, 28 international monitors as part of the NDI mission. There is a preliminary report by NDI. There should also be a final one eventually. It did not find free and fair, and in fact, I'm going to forget. So it is the NDI report that speaks to the overall judgment of the elections. They found the pre-election period to be flawed. But of course, I should refer everybody to that report to represent it accurately, because again, I'm one of 28 monitors. What did I see? We drove at 5 in the morning. By 6:45, we were at a polling station. I saw 5 polling stations in Marnauli, 1 in Balsini. There were 2 that were, you know, perfect, and one was a small Armenian village somewhere in the mountains. The other was IDP Georgians. It was little old ladies, teachers who had, you know, cookies and student art, and everything was run beautifully. Each of those polling stations had about 200 votes. Those were tiny little polling stations. Why I'm saying this is that people really know how to organize elections if they want to. The larger polling stations where you had 2,000 or 3,000 voters, there were lots of violations, and violations like someone taking you through from, you know, it was very clear that there were you know, people who had observer badges but were not part of the precinct election committee, who were taking people through the voting process. They were meeting them outside, they were bringing them in, they were leaning into the vote booth and showing, you know, pointing something out. They were feeding the ballot into the machine, you know, and clearly taking people through. And you saw this over and over, and you saw that these kind of informal personalities, whoever they are, had a lot of authority and were able to override the members of the precinct election committee. What this reflects, and especially in ethnic minority places, but not only in places, these are very poor communities with a very, you know, very little opportunity. And, you know, I think people know that there's a tradition of mobilizing the vote through very coercive measures. Georgian Dream won with 53%, or, you know, according to the CEC results, won with 53% overall. But in these remote villages where really the power dynamic is quite, you know, traditional or even feudal, if you can put it this way, they won with 85–90% of the vote. So now what can I observe? I can observe that there's a power relationship going on within these polling stations that is clearly unofficial, that the local vote monitors are not filing. As an international observer, you only observe. It is up to the local observers to file complaints. People from these communities are not going to suddenly walk in on, you know, the day of the most important election and challenge the entire power dynamic in that village. The places where there were observers from Tbilisi, you did have people challenging and trying to file complaints. And what was pretty amazing to me is that you had these, you know, kind of informal guys, whoever they were, kind of shouting at the observers with, you know, we're standing there as international observers, and there was a TV crew. And still they're being shouted down, and the whole thing is becoming very conflictual. So for me, it's, you know, I saw 6 polling stations. 2 were fine, but they had very, very few votes. The other 4 were deeply problematic. We wrote down the violations. When does this add up to enough, right? That's very hard to say. That's up to, you know, other people to kind of add up all the different pieces and come up with a judgment overall. Because, okay, and then I closed in Tbilisi, where everything was fine. And the place where I watched the actual vote tabulation, but that particular district in Tbilisi, I think, was 2,000 votes. The biggest polling place I saw out in Marnauli was 3,000 votes. So it is quite a lot of votes out there in the villages that I think are not well accounted for, and that you don't necessarily have official complaints registering them. So I think this is a difficult, so there's, this is very qualitative, what I said. There's the statistical analysis that somebody referred to from the Harris polls, and folks have to weigh that. Let me say a word on US-Georgia relations. So this went into a tailspin in the spring in response to the NGO law, but not only. Ivanishvili coming out and calling the United States a global war party. This was very problematic back here, not only among Democrats, but plenty of Republicans. So I can talk about it now, or I can come back to it later, but there was a tweet from the chairman of the Helsinki Committee, it's Congressman Wilson, who's a Republican, saying that Bidzina should be sanctioned, and he should be sanctioned now. There were leaks from the US administration within the last month, maybe a couple of months, saying that there is a legal basis prepared to sanction Bidzina Ivanishvili, that like legally we have our arguments worked out. We haven't made a political judgment to do that. So this relationship is really in, probably the worst place that it's been since, Shevardnadze Baker. And I'm not sure. I see that Georgian Dream politicians are very excited about the outcome of our elections, but there really shouldn't be, because I think this is a very bipartisan. And I should also say Georgian assistance to Georgia is frozen. There's like $95 million that's frozen right now. I would not assume that is not only contingent on the assessment of the elections. That is much broader in terms of like, it's about the relationship. And in Washington, why is Georgia so celebrated? And Georgia receives support and attention in DC far exceeding many other places, if you think of Georgia's size and so forth. And it's because we believe very much that we have shared values. This is not seen as a transactional foreign policy relationship. This is seen as a long-standing partnership based on shared values. And when Georgian Dream throws that out, the overall reassessment is not even purely about how is the election assessed. It's like, why are we doing this? Why are we investing heavily, not just financially, but also just in the relationship, in the diplomacy and so forth? If Georgians don't want that, and if Georgians are going someplace else, and if this government is so actively undermining, it's between the foreign agents law, the LGBT law, various things that they say. I wanted to mention one more. Congressman Turner, also a Republican, who went with Senator Shaheen to visit in the summer. They had a CODEL, also came out very, disappointed in the reception that he received from Kabahidze. So I wouldn't make a lot of assumptions yet. I think there's a fundamental reassessment of the relationship going on. Thank you. I probably spoke for too long.
No, you didn't, Miriam. Thank you very much. And of course, you see, one of the issues is what the Georgian government thinks, and of course what the Georgian population think. And this is one of the things we're trying to get at here. The suggestion is that most Georgians do support continuing good relationship with the United States and with the EU, but as you point out, the Georgian government is taking a different position. But thank you so much, and also for your description of what's going on the ground there during the elections. So we have now around 30 minutes or so for questions, and we've got quite a few. And I'm going to start with one from Edward Saakashvili, and it's a very good question, because we do know that Georgian Dream has Marina suggested, was very successful. Marina wants to use the word propagandizing, but very successful, let's say, in propagandizing or persuading the Georgian population that they were going to govern in their interests and they were going to keep the peace and a stable political order. So the question is, why people voted the way that they did. And Edward Saakashvili asked this question. I think it's a very pertinent one. Lots of discussion of the election centers on mass media, messaging, and propaganda on TV, war versus peace, West versus East. But did most voters actually make up their mind based on responding to mass media ideological framings rather than based on the ground societal dynamics and local ties? So the question here is about why is it that Georgian Dream did so well? We know in part that they manipulated the vote in rural areas, but are there other reasons why people might support Georgian Dream? In Tbilisi, surprisingly, they seem to, if we believe the outcome of the elections in Tbilisi, they seem to get between 40 and 45% of the vote in most of the electoral districts in Tbilisi. So, this is a question I think we have to examine and ask. It may be, as Marina says, and as Becca agrees, that this is largely the result of successful propaganda. But are there other things involved here that might determine why people continue to support Georgian Dream? And I'm going to hand it over to Becca and then Marina, because they both dealt with that issue, and then our other panelists can come in too. So Becca, let me start with you.
Okay, Stephen. So first of all, we shouldn't assume that in Tbilisi elections were free and fair, because there are lots of public employees also in Tbilisi, and carousels like multiple voting was played out also in Tbilisi. So also the Tbilisi results, even though in Tbilisi the government was anyway defeated and the opposition won Tbilisi, both Tbilisi and Rustavi, this doesn't reflect the real voting. But the question is very good. And I'll start with the events in the spring when the protest broke out in the capital. And it was clear in the spring, because I traveled in the regions while there was a mass protest in Tbilisi, and people who are busy with their daily business, like farming and living their own lives, didn't have much clue what was it about. And I discovered that the democracy didn't have even a single network which covers the entire country. So there is not even a single political party which runs its offices in every district of Georgia. Apart from that, no NGOs in most of the rural areas. And I mean, those NGOs are very sporadical, and they are not united. They have no the same messaging or strategic communication. We don't have trade unions or other sorts of unions. So the democracy doesn't have any sort of network whatsoever. On the other hand, the government has in every village, 4 or 5 representatives who are empowered and who come with power and who come with money. So who those are? GD, Georgian Dream, has a party organization in every district. Secondly, the mayors, they have, I mean, with the exception of the one municipality, they control all other municipalities. On top of that, principals of schools and the kindergartens are appointed by the Ministry of Education, and it is very well documented that prior to the appointment, they are scanned, or clearance is given by the security agencies on political loyalty. And on top of that, the Georgian Orthodox Church, and the priests in the villages. So, I mean, and this gives a leverage to the ruling party to reach out almost virtually every household. And they will find in every household, or almost in every household, a person who is vulnerable. I mean, someone who is employed, someone who tries to register the land, someone who tries to avoid recruitment in the army, etc., etc. And this person is taken as a hostage, let's say, and the deal is made. On the other hand, the opposition doesn't have any of this whatsoever. And I mean, looking at the scale, how this thing worked out, I'm surprised that there are up to 800 or up to 900,000 people in the country who were brave enough to go and vote for the opposition.
Okay, good. I'm glad you touched on the opposition. We'll come back to that. Marina, would you like to make any comments on this?
So not much to add, but simply I want to make the empirical data. So the ongoing research almost by CRRC, almost 10 years, they are asking on the Caucasus parameters, they ask one question. So from where you are getting the information about the political issues? And the majority of the respondents answer from the TV and media. So we have to consider TV and media as an influential factor just to make up our minds. All that Becca has already said. And I think that one of the major, let's say, omissions in all this process is that political parties started their campaign, I guess, very late. And even though they do not have representatives, so still it means that they do not know who is voting for them. They do not have collected, they have not been ever in, for example, I have spent 3 months in my village, and the village is quite big. And I definitely can say that there was no even one meeting with the people just to present who they are, let's say so. And how to say, I think that media is the influential factor to persuade the people and just to give the idea what is going on. They take this information. And the second is that there is no network of political parties, opposition political parties, who are delivering their messages there. That's it, what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Okay, I'm going to turn now to Miriam and to Salome with a different question, unless you want to say something very briefly.
I wanted to add just something very briefly because it's an issue, as Professor Marina and Becca were speaking about this, that resonated very deeply with the diaspora community here. Post-elections, Prime Minister Kobakhidze specifically talked about diaspora vote and the fact that according to him, the reason that diaspora voted overwhelmingly in support of opposition is because they are uninformed. And this was a very offensive statement to many here, because while Georgians are abroad, so many of them overwhelmingly spend a lot of time trying to be connected with what's going on in Georgia. The reason why you saw such an unprecedented turnout in registration, in the desire to vote, in the demands for additional polling stations is because they care about their country. And we heard so much during this pre-election campaign from the Georgian Dream that people who are abroad don't have a home, they're stateless, they don't love this country, and after the elections that they're uninformed. And one sentiment that was shared here is that perhaps it's not that the diaspora community is uninformed, perhaps they're a little bit removed from the informational or disinformational assault and the propaganda that's happening inside of the country, and they are actually able to see the big picture of what is happening and why the sort of shift for Georgia is so critically dangerous. So I just wanted to reflect that as something that definitely was a point of discussion among the diaspora members.
Thank you, Salome. So I've got two questions here. I'm going to sort of combine them and start with Miriam. So one from Toby Davis. Should Western countries simply not recognize the election results for the foreseeable future? That's the one question. And the other was from Adrian Briscoe, which is somewhat connected. What are the implications of this election for Georgian EU and NATO orientation and ambitions, and the country's security in general? So they are somewhat connected, those two questions, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Miriam. So firstly, what should Western countries say in terms of their evaluation? Should they be firmer than they are in terms of their of the outcome? And what more generally does this mean for Georgia's relationship with the United States and the EU?
Okay.
So I'm going to hand it over to you to start.
Okay, I'll start. I'm sure others, and I think, I'd be interested in kind of what our Georgian colleagues think about that, about a step like I can say this. Look, we know from the polling, I mean, and it's weird to be saying this. I was going to say from the polling, we know that it's close, but then we thought it was going to be close in our elections in the US from the polling. So it's very hard, to make this judgment whether to accept the results or not accept the results of an election is an extremely difficult decision. I'm a little wary of trying to weigh in on it, because I think there's so many different data points. There's all the different observations, which do, I think all of them, whether that's NDI and IRI and OSCE, local observers. I mean, I think all of them cast doubt on the election. Do any of them come out and say, no, don't recognize it? I'm not sure that they do. This is really up to the policymakers. I know that, some people in the Georgian opposition wouldn't mind seeing that. But again, is that something that Georgia, how, and to connect it to the broader question, well, what about this relationship between Georgia and the EU and the US? I've had, and I think Georgians that I've talked to are in different places on this. One person said, okay, so we'll be Belarus, you're gonna, I mean, is it up to the point of what we saw in Belarus, right? That's a place where we explicitly said we don't recognize the outcome. Georgia did not have a process like Belarus's, right? On one hand, and we recognize what goes on in Azerbaijan as though it was an election, right? So it's just very hard. At the same time, on the margins, did GD squeak through, or was there 5-6% that through all these different things that we heard about? Do we all think that Georgian Dream did manipulate 5-6% somewhere here? So again, I'm going to leave that, Toby, that's back at you into USG and other policymakers, and how do we approach this more broadly? But then there's the relationship. And it is not clear to me how you go ahead with a relationship when Bizina Ivanishvili is saying that the US is the global party of war, when they've passed the NGO law and they're sort of repudiating so many of these basic values. I'll mention another. I mean, what's happening now with people being fined for putting up a poster. There's quite a lot of repression, just at the verge of repression, with Georgian civil society. What we saw in the spring was terrible. People were being threatened. People's children were getting calls threatening the parents. There was graffiti. There was targeting of individuals in civil society. So it's very hard, I think, to try to figure out what is the U.S. leverage. How do you keep this relationship on track? And then how do you do it if, even in Tbilisi, that we think maybe it wasn't perfect, but, by the way, what did turn out to be good that people were questioning in advance was all the technology, the scanners worked. Tbilisi, okay, where maybe it wasn't perfect, but it was reasonably good. But in Tbilisi, 4 out of 10 people voted for Georgian Dream. So it's hard to weigh this. And Georgian Dream is out there with an explicitly anti-US message. I'll stop. Sorry.
And let me shift this now to ask, let's start with Marina on this question of the outcome of the election and what the implications are for its relationship with the United States and the EU. But I want to ask Marina what she thinks the implications are for relationship with Russia. Russia, of course, has played a major role in these elections. We know that through the Georgian Orthodox Church, perhaps it's been quite instrumental in its work there. So does this mean that Georgia now is going to move closer to Russia, and that we've heard statements from Russia's like Margarita Simonyan saying this is a wonderful election, it's very positive. To what extent is this going to impact Georgian-Russia relations, do you think?
Thank you, Steve. It's a very difficult question to answer. The one thing what I can say is that the country who is uploading Georgian Dream is Russia, with their representatives officially in media, etc. Dugin even said that this is at least Georgia is on the right way. So I think that it's not only Georgian Orthodox Church having close ties with Russia, but I think that our political establishment, with the background of the wealth they are controlling, they have also strong ties. And one of the major problems for our country is that there is a segregation of very small number of the rich people and those who are keeping on the edge of the poverty almost, and there is no such established middle class. Even our prime minister threatened, he has no right to do that by the law, threatened all universities that he will just introduce such a new, let's say, reform in the higher education just to clean up the higher education institutions. So with this, I do not know what he will invent, something like what we had in 30s, I guess, 20th century 30s, that when it was withdrawal, kick out of even the founders of the university. So what I mean is that our life will become ugly ideologized, back again to what we have experienced. At least I have experienced 33 years I have lived in Soviet Union, and I do know what is that. And in best case, I think that we will more open to the Russian influence. And particularly, it's not my field, so excuse me, but particularly in July when Mr. Putin visited Azerbaijan, and in 2 weeks, Mr. Aliyev just declared that they want to enter to BRICS. So it's very difficult political question that I'm not in. Let's say that is not my field. I can speculate, and I think that it's not good to do now. But I think that the Russian influence, this hidden recognition started from 2008 after the Georgian War, and it's going up and up. And I don't know where it will be finished. Concerning the EU, NATO, and US relations, I do not think that even these countries will extremely how to say, friendly defend the Georgian people interests. So when the political establishment see the all evils in these, let's say, three structures, EU, US, and NATO, I do not have much expectations that it will be continue as it was last 30 years.
Mm. Okay, I'm going to switch gears now and go back to the question that was raised about the role of the opposition. We know they've signed the Georgian charter that President Zurabishvili put forward. There are four main opposition blocs, and I have a question here from Lara Olsen. She says, given the role of the fear of war for those voters who did vote GD, still 45% roughly, did the opposition parties or coalitions present clear pathways of how they would maintain peace? What was done to counter the seemingly quite effective message from GD, and was it enough, in your view? So I'm going to turn to Becca and then Salome on this question. So role of the opposition, were they effective? Marina just suggested that they were not active enough. Turn to Becca and then to Salome to answer this question about the role of the opposition. Go ahead, Becca.
So this thing about the war, which was left unresponded by the opposition, was a major mistake of the opposition. I think it was absolutely major mistake. And I mean, I will give you what was their rationale. So they thought that this was governmental propaganda, and the government wanted to drag the opposition in this discourse, war versus peace. And they thought that this was anyway end up in in government's victory, in Georgian Dream's victory, because this was their narrative, and instead of being dragged into this discourse, they chose to introduce alternative question: the EU or Russia? And it wasn't successful. Eventually, we see it wasn't successful because EU is something distant, not experienced by the most of the voters, and the war is here. In our lifetime, it was experienced 4 times. I mean, the civil wars, 2 wars in South Ossetia, war in Abkhazia, and it is here. This is something which we have all experienced, right? And it's imminent threat. The Russian troops are deployed in 40 kilometers. The war is raging in Ukraine, and people see that the Western support to Ukraine is pretty much limited, or at least it falls short to what it is needed for the Ukrainian victory, right? So it was a mistake. So the opposition was supposed to speak how they're going to achieve modus vivendi vis-a-vis Russia. But on the other hand, we cannot be too hard on opposition, because nowadays, being opposition member or opposition supporter, especially in the region, it means that you are unemployed, your family members are employed, you are harassed in all possible ways, and you don't have much future. I mean, I'll give you example.
But be brief, Becca. We've got time for one more question after this.
Right, very brief. So there was one of the villages in Tetritsgaro where Dzlir Sakartvelo or Lelo had 2 representatives in the election commission, and they received 0 vote. So both of their representatives in the commission voted for most probably 41. And what I guess happened? That these people either were intimidated or bribed or some other method. So it is difficult for the opposition.
Right. Right. No, understood. Salome, do you want to comment on this at all?
Sure, I will add just really briefly in terms of the role of opposition, and maybe I'll expand this question a little bit to the role of civil society as well, because the Georgian civil society and what they can do. You know, we've been discussing these, and I see in the questions also about independent investigation of the fraud allegations, regardless of where the international community or the observers stand at the moment, we all agree that there are still outstanding questions. And I know Miriam mentioned that the voting counting machines worked. I think there are still outstanding questions about, like, maybe, yes, they worked in terms of scanning, but there are still allegations of vote secrecy, ballot secrecy that has gone all the way to the courts. So there's still additional space and demand for further investigation of all the allegations, and the opposition and the civil society has a incredibly large role to play in both demanding those investigations and then also supporting, demanding, creating the enabling environment, which is to require support to the judiciary to be able to do their part, to support the international will to push for this independent, impartial investigation, to pressure all involved stakeholders to actually not just blanket. I know there's perhaps not the will at the moment to just issue blanket statements, but there has to be agreement that the investigations must take place in an impartial environment where any questions, whether the diaspora has questions about their names being on the lists in the machines, whether there are questions about intimidation, harassment, there are more than enough allegations and emerging evidence that are yet to be investigated, and there has to be a focus on this, and the time is very short. November 21st is the deadline where the Central Election Commission will issue their final tally of the votes. So that time frame is narrowing, and those activities, those actions, those pressures must be applied now. And I think everyone outside of the ruling party has to come together to push those points forward. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Salome. Well, we don't have much time, and there've been some wonderful questions here on the Q&A, and I can't ask them all. We've had one from David Sichinava, who's an expert on elections, electoral patterns, about the lack of representation of regional representatives on the opposition party lists. So this was one question that was asked, and but I want to come to this final question, and very briefly, all of you, starting perhaps with Miriam. This is from Anna Vabkhadze, and also the similar question from John Collins. This question, of course, concerns the current situation in the US. This is Anna Vabkhadze, with many of the protesters in Georgia counting on support from the international community, how might the outcome of the US presidential election influence their expectations? And I know you've already expressed some skepticism about the impact of the US elections, Miriam, but would you like to just maybe have a final few words? And I'm going to ask all of you to say this in 30 seconds or less.
The current administration is very focused on the Caucasus. They're also focused on Azerbaijan-Armenia regulation and trying to get Azerbaijan to actually sign a peace treaty that they've been working on for a while. So I would say, don't jump the gun to January. This administration is very focused for the next 3 months. And I liked the comments that we need to keep investigating and looking into it before some kind of, before final judgment should be made. So, there's 3 months before before we'll know the impact of a Trump presidency. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Marina now for a soundbite. So in 20 seconds or less. I'm sorry about this. What do you think about the impact of US elections?
I think that, so there are a lot of dimensions, but I will focus on the rhetorics. If Georgia wants to continue relationship with the US, So they have to change their rhetorics, particularly from the political establishment. If they don't, so the outcome is clear.
Becca? Briefly.
I mean, changing rhetorics is possible. I agree with Marina, and they will do this, I think. But if the Georgian elections are not recognized as illegitimate, this cannot change. So, I mean, this is a big variable, huge variable. And in terms of Trump's victory, I think this is a huge blow for democracy, because if the populism and anti-democratism is normalized globally, primarily coming from the United States, I mean, this gives a lot of free hand for the Georgian Dream.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Becca. Salome, final word from you.
Maybe let me end with optimism in this time of very difficult situations all around the world. I think the best thing about the Georgian community here and the U.S. approach towards Georgia has been historically that Georgia and Georgian people have enjoyed bipartisan support in the U.S. government, in the U.S. Congress, in House of Representatives, and in the Senate. And we hope, we count on this, that the support to Georgian people will continue to be bipartisan. So no matter, how the House of Representatives lands in the end, there are two important bills currently, both in the Senate and in the House, and they contain important steps to help Georgia continue its Euro-Atlantic aspirations, and we hope to see those go through. So anyone on the call today or listening later, please reach out to your senators, to your representatives, and continue to monitor and help them support passing of those measures. That will be great support to Georgia and continue to keep that linkage, the partnership between the U.S. and Georgia.
Salome, thank you for that optimistic message when a lot of us are feeling rather pessimistic about the future. But I think you're absolutely right. Life goes on, work goes on, and we want to do our best for Georgia in terms of its relationship with the U.S. So I want to thank all the people who attended this. Really some fascinating questions, and we just did not have time to get to them all. But thank you for sending them in. And also I want to thank in particular our panelists, Becca, Marina, Miriam, and Salome. Wonderful presentations. You stimulated a very good discussion. So thank you all for attending. And I also want to thank Laura Sargent and the Davis Center for helping us put this on. So thank you, everybody. Good luck.
Thank you.
Be safe.